What's up guys, it's Sidzi here, welcome back to Yugioh Deck of the Day. Today we have a BUSTER BLADER deck profile, a deck that we haven't really covered before in the channel, and I think that now that this deck has actually been able to do something to the competitive level, I think it's a good time to see a list on this deck, because I know BUSTER BLADER is an all-time favorite deck that people have been enjoying playing and messing with, but the deck was not really a competitive deck ever. It always had this really strong combo, but only now people actually realized how strong this combo can actually be, and because of how easy it is to access without having to use many cards, by incorporating other strategies into the deck, you can actually make a fully viable rogue deck that can actually defeat the meta. So here's the list that I've come up with. So before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So to start off with the monsters, play of course 3 copies of Buster Whelp, the Distraction Swordsman. This is basically the card you always want to see. It's the only of the little monsters you play. Unfortunately, we cannot use the Buster lock anymore because the Buster that negates all of your opponent's summoning from the extra deck is now banned, but still it's something that deck never really actually relied on, so you don't really need to play it in order to be able to win. As long as this card is around, the deck actually has the 1-card combo that it can use to beat pretty much any deck, as long as it relies on monsters. So I think in this particular format, I think the deck is a bit worse than it was last format, because we are not combo heavy as we used to, because we have stuff like Eldritch, but there are certain engines that you can play in the deck that can make the deck's matchup against control decks even better, so it's not that big of a problem, even though your main combo can sometimes be dead against certain decks because Eldritch is so relevant in this format. But still, Buster Whelp is the monster you always want to see in your hand, and even if you don't see it, there are still other stuff you can do, but as long as you can get to this combo, and if you're playing stuff against like Virtual World or decks that rely a lot on monsters on the field, then you can just skip one of their turns basically, and then come back and destroy them during the next turn. 2 copies of Buster Blader Distraction Swordmaster. You can play this or you can play the original Buster Blader, doesn't really matter. This one just has a little bit more going for it because Buster Blade doesn't do much, but you need something to be able to use for your prologue in order to be able to fusion summon. So you need this card in order to go into your fusion monster, and once you get to the fusion monster and the synchro monster on the field, you have the lock going. Now for the supplementary engines of the deck, you have a lot of options, but I think Dogmatika and Dragoon are basically what you need. So for the Dogmatika engine, play 3 copies of Ecclesia. I max out on Ecclesia. I've seen a lot of people play 1, but I think even if you don't open Nadir, Ecclesia is a really good card because you can easily get to a Linkuribo by using your Buster Whelp, so you can special summon her right away, and then you can get a search for your Fleur-de-Lis or your Dogmatika Punishment. So this is a really good card to be able to go to, even if you cannot actually get to your combo, because sometimes your Buster Whelp may get hand trapped, then you won't have anything going for you unless you have another way to get to your trap. But still, Ecclesia is a card that gives you disruption and another body on the field, and if she manages to survive, and then maybe during the following turn you can go into an Anaconda, and then you can go into Dragoon, which will give you the power you need in order to be able to escape. 1 copy of Fleur-de-Lis, you search this with Ecclesia. You have to search either this or your Dogmatika Punishment. If you open Nadir, you can actually get both, and this gives you more power against control decks and combo decks, because against control decks, even if you can't really negate anything with Fleur-de-Lis, having extra bodies on the field is actually how you pressure control decks, because they cannot get too many monsters on the field most of the time. So by getting a lot of monsters out is actually how you beat them. And this deck, if you play only the Buster Blader engine, then you cannot really do that because you don't have a lot of ways to get monsters on the field, especially if your starting plays get stopped. So this is why you cannot really afford to play a pure Buster Blader deck. You can actually play it, but you won't make it work as good as a version as this. But I understand if you cannot afford Nadir, you can actually fit in more hand traps, or maybe another supplementary engine. Maybe going for Mech Knights is a good option, will give you more bodies on the field for attack. But if you have access to the Dogmatikas, then I suggest you play them 100%. Play of course 1 Dark Magician and 1 Red Eyes. You have to play them for Dragoon. I also play the 1 copy of Red Eyes Wyvern because I fully commit to the Red Eyes fusion, because if you just play with Anaconda, it's not something you can do turn 1 unfortunately with this deck, because you would have to play stuff like Extenders, a special summon the Sun from the hand in order to be able to do that, but it's not really that optimal, and you don't really need your normal summon. Yes, Buster Whelp is an amazing card, but it's just the 3 of you are not going to draw it every single time, so just getting a Dragoon on the field with maybe a trap trick for your prologue sometimes can be good enough, and you also play hand traps which can help you. So playing fusion with Insight gives you more power during the first turn if you don't open your Whelp, and also Wyvern can help you bring back your Dragoon later, so you can get more monsters on the field even if your opponent deals with your board. For the hand traps, I play 3 copies of Ash Blossom, of course, she's the most generic hand trap right now, and 3 copies of Skullmeister because I like the card against the Eldritch matchup, and I think this is the one that you have most trouble with, especially if you cannot get access to Dragoon early. But if you can get access to Dragoon, then Eldritch has a lot of trouble dealing with it, because if it has negated something and actually managed to destroy it in order to gain that 1000 boost, then Eldritch won't be able to deal with it even if it gets the 1000 boost by its own effect, so they have to rely on stuff like Ice Dragon's Prison, so you just have to be patient and try to negate only that, because nothing else is going to be able to deal with Dragoon anyway. For the spells, play 3 copies of Red Eyes Fusion, of course, and 3 copies of Red Eyes Insight. You have to max out on both of them if you want to play the full Red Eyes engine, unless you want to play just 1 Red Eyes Fusion Fusion, but you can actually do it, but you would have to play extenders in order to be able to get 2 monsters on the field early, which is not something that you really need to, because you're committing slots into something that you're relying a lot on Anaconda, because it's most likely that if your opponent has something to negate Anaconda, then you won't have anything else, but if they negate Red Eyes Fusion, then you have your traps in order to go to, but if you use your Whelp and you have another card to use for your Anaconda, you're committing 2 cards to a play that might get stopped, while Red Eyes Fusion is just 1 card, so it's basically a 1-card economy for that matter. 1 copy of Magical Eyes Fusion. When I'm playing the full drawn Red Eyes engine with 3 Red Eyes Fusion and 3 Red Eyes Insight, I always try to fit in a Magical Eyes Fusion because you summon Dragoon without having to use your Anaconda, so then you can actually use your Anaconda later to banish those materials to get a 2nd copy of Dragoon out, which is something that's really huge for any deck like this. So as long as Dragoon is not limited, which might be in the future, we'll see very soon, you can actually use this to your advantage to get more copies of it on the field, so you can either get 2 Dragoons on the field, or the second one if the first one gets destroyed, and with Red Eyes Wyvern you can bring the other one back, so you actually have a lot of ways to get more Dragoons on the field, and if Eldritch cannot deal with 1 Dragoon, there's absolutely no way it can deal with 2. 3 copies of Nadir Servant, of course, is a card you have to max out if you're playing Dogmatikas. This card is an amazing starter. It gives you access to Ecclesia, which will give you the Fleur-de-Lis, and you can actually get the Dogmatika Punishment with this combo. You actually want to search your Dogmatika Punishment first with Ecclesia, and search during the end phase your Fleur-de-Lis with your Titanic Lad, because you cannot search Dogmatika Punishment during the end phase, because if you do, you won't be able to set it because it's a trap, so you have to do it this order. 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. This is another insurance strategy against Eldritch, because I still think that control decks, not just Eldritch, even if you're playing against Subterrors, which is going to be a lot more popular now because it won the Remote Duel Invitational, and stuff like Altergeist, I think that it kind of struggles with, because your standard bread and butter combo doesn't do much against those decks, so I think you need pack removal in the main deck just to not auto-lose to such decks. For the traps, play 3 copies of Prologue of the Distraction Swordsman. You have to max out on this. You also play Trap Trick to get access to this, because sometimes Buster Whelp is not going to resolve, or if you're not going to draw Buster Whelp because it's just a 3-off, you cannot really get access to it very, very easily. So I think you need to max it out, because it's a card that gives you access to the main combo of the deck. 2 copies of Distraction Sword Memories. This is another part of the combo. You just need to discard this for your Prologue, because you send a Distraction Sword 1 Buster Blader from your deck to the grave. So this is how you get to the combo, by banishing this card. 1 copy of Dogmatika Punishment. You can play more of this, but basically you just don't really need them. You can actually use them as part of your combo, because if you open your Ecclesia, if you open your Nadir, you can get access to it. And you have to be very careful with this card. You have to first use your actual combo to get the Fusion Monster and the Synchro Monster on the field, and then use this, because if you use this card, then you will lock you out of the extra deck, so you have to do it this order. Just be careful so you don't actually lose a game because you misplayed with that. And 3 copies of Trap Trick to get access to the Prologue as fast as possible. For the extra deck, for the Fusion Monsters, play 2 copies of Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. This monster is actually insane. When you combo it with Buster Dragon, you can actually lock out your opponent completely for a turn. So if your opponent is playing a deck that actually relies on monsters, then they will not be able to play, because everything will be switched to defense and everything will be negated. But if your opponent is playing more of a control deck, this is why you need to rely on other stuff, because this is not going to do anything against those decks unless your opponent maybe plays like an Altergeist, start with Marionette or Melusik, but especially Eldritch, they don't really rely on any monster effects on the field, so this is why this combo doesn't really work. So if you want to play this deck, you have to be prepared for pretty much every matchup, so you need to play cards like Dragoon in order to be able to stop that. 2 copies of Dragoon, you play 2 because of Magical Eyes Fusion. It's very easy to summon, and even if the one gets destroyed, you can bring it back with Red Eyes Wyvern, so it's very, very common that you will actually get on 2 Dragoons on the field, which is very oppressive. 1 Titanic Lad, you set this with your Nadir in order to get to the end phase your Fleur-de-Lis. 1 NTSS, you play this for Dogmatika Punishment in order to be able to destroy 2 cards. For the Synchro Monsters, play 2 copies of Buster Dragon. This is the combo with the Destruction Swordsman. You use this in combination with the other in order to switch everything to defense, because they become dragons, so everything will be negated. 1 copy of Hot Rod Dragon Archfiend Abyss. You can summon this with your Buster Dragon because it requires a tuner and a non-tuner Dark Dragon Synchro Monster, which is what Buster Dragon is, and because Buster Whelp is actually a level 1 tuner, you can summon this very easily for a follow-up in order to get a follow-up negate on the field. 1 Wind Pegasus Anticanister. Sometimes you don't really want to actually send NTS with Dogmatika Punishment, because in order to get the full value out of this combo, you actually have to wait until your opponent has at least 2 cards on the field, so you can pop 1 with your punishment and 1 with your NTSS. But if you send Wind Pegasus, you can actually use it when your opponent only has 1 monster on the field, and then they have to be able to go through your board, and knowing that something is going to get spinned if they destroy one of your cards, because Wind Pegasus is in the grave. So I suggest you play both if you have the space in your extra deck playing Dogmatika Punishment. For the Link Monsters, play 1 Link Rebo. Of course, you have to be able to tag out your Buster Whelp into an extra deck monster, so you can special summon Ecclesia. 1 copy of Protector Whelp of the Destruction Swordsman. This is a monster that you don't really summon too often, but because it's the Buster Blader Link and actually has a way to send a Destruction Sword card from your deck to the grave and special summon a Buster Blader from your hand, you can actually use this sometimes, but it won't happen too often, but still it's something extra. 1 copy of Anaconda. You usually use this to go into your Magical Eyes Fusion, but it's not very rare that you will actually use it for Red Eyes Fusion, because even if you max out on Red Eyes Fusion and Insight, still that's 6 cards, you're not going to see them every single game, so you have to go into your Anaconda for the follow-up if you have 2 monsters on the field, and sometimes, worst case scenario, you would just normal summon one of your hand traps in order to be able to do that, which is why I think don't play impermanence in this format for multiple reasons. Mainly because in this particular deck you don't have a lot of monsters that you can summon to go into Anaconda, so sometimes even summoning a Meister can actually go into Anaconda, and because impermanence is not a good card in this format in general. One copy of Unicorn, sometimes the Link 2s will stick on the field, so you'll need to be able to go into a Link 3 that can actually do something, and one copy of Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, because you play a lot of high-level monsters on the field, and some decks cannot actually deal with this, and this is another insurance strategy that I can actually beat on its own control decks. So yep, that's the deck, guys. It's a deck that I think can actually thrive in certain formats. This format I think is actually a little bit difficult in order to play this deck, but you can still make it work. But there are other formats that we're going to go through eventually, because we're going to sit through combo formats very, very soon again, because it always happens with a TCG. So if you want fun of this deck, you have to be prepared, because it will be time for this deck to actually shine and beat everything. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos, and we'll see you next time.